And good evening and welcome back to Your View with me, JJ Tawa. Interesting conversation there with John Steenhuisen. You be the judge. Tell me your views. Do you believe him? Do you think he's going to take the DA somewhere different? Hashtag Your View on 405 with your views. Of course, we welcome your perspectives. Because Themba Maseko joins me now. He's former GCIS CEO, also former head of communication for Business Leadership South Africa, and an entrepreneur, businessman in his own right, and of course a senior public servant for many years. And I'll be talking to him about many interesting issues. Themba, thank you so much, my brother, for finally agreeing to come.
Thank you, JJ.
I think it was easier to get the president to come and talk to me. You know?
I think it's your hours.
The hour? No, it's a night show. Man. Night shows everywhere in the world. The issue here is we have time. We're not in a rush, you know. So today I want you to just tell me what you think of what's been going on. You know, your testimony at the state capture obviously was interesting, but it triggered in me the issue about public servants vis-a-vis political leaders, and how, in your view, these two things must complement each other, right, to take this country forward, right? And your example of you being rung up to say, do X, do Y, wrong things, and now you have to be saying, hey, I didn't want to do those things. In fact, I refused to do those things. And it ended up making you lose your job, in whatever form or shape. And there are many civil servants in your position today, not during the Zuma years, today, right, who are made to sign things, who are made to authorize things that they don't understand, who are made to aid corruption, you know, both by their colleagues who are civil servants in other departments and by their political leaders who are their bosses, who in fact hold the pen to either dismissing them and so on. So I want us to explore this whole conversation in that context. Just give it a shot. What do you think is first of all, is the state of that kind of relationship between public servants and the political principals in this country?
I think it needs a lot of work. I characterize this phase as what I call the third revolution that we're going through as a country. And this is essentially a revolution to build a solid state that can address the poverty challenges that we face as a nation. And one of the biggest fears, or worries that all of us should be having at this stage, is the fact that the experiences of professionals who've been working in the public service, both in government departments but also in state-owned enterprises, has been this unhealthy relationship between the politicians and the administrators, which is actually creating quite a bad vibe, because what this is communicating to professionals, both black and white professionals out there, is that working for the state is not in your best interest, because you end up being controversial, you end up your reputation being tarnished. So I think it's going to pose a risk for the state, because it means that we're going to have a challenge of attracting capable, highly qualified, highly skilled people from joining the public service. But essentially, the issues are about the responsibilities. What is the minister responsible for, and what is the civil servant or the administrator responsible for? And it's an issue that we started battling with as early as 1994. And I'm afraid to say we're not getting it quite right.
We're not getting it quite right.
We're not getting it right because...
Is the issue of corruption, though, the one that's actually muddying the water? And let's talk frankly here, right? When people get into positions, and I can see there are quite a number of new ministers and deputy ministers, right? New mayors, new councillors, new premiers, right? There's a sense in which they want to understand where is money being spent on what, right? And some of them with a business acumen or with a planning mind that says, hey, I'm going to be here for 5 years. What am I going to do when this is over, right? Find a way in which they have to. So get some people who I'm going to work with so that by the time I retire, there's some business nest somewhere. Something that maybe if it was transparent, it wouldn't be a problem. That if you are working for government, the department that you worked in, we were in public
service and administration,
right?
Public works as well.
Yeah,
so
right?
I've been around the block.
But you were a communicator before then. Maybe you had you then decided, I'm going to start a communication business. They won't do business with me, but they can do business with Matlosane municipality there, right? And I'll be a non-executive. I don't think that should be so terrible. But because it's been muddied with corruption, it has now become so muddled, and the Auditor General's report is clear evidence of that. 60 billion rand in irregular expenditure, wasteful expenditure, etc., which the Auditor General is quick to say. Politicians, right, must not obfuscate and say it's got nothing to do with corruption. In fact, it has. Because when they do that irregular expenditure and so on, it's because they are always trying to bypass a process, a proper process of getting these things happening. Do you think that the corruption issue is a big elephant that's therefore standing in fixing that relationship?
I think I'm using the phrase fighting corruption and state capture is actually the third revolution that we're engaging in as a country. The first revolution was defeating colonialism and apartheid.
Yeah.
And I think we did extremely well as far as that is concerned.
Yeah.
The second revolution was to come up with programs to address poverty, unemployment, and inequality in our society. And I think that revolution is still ongoing and it will go on for quite a long time. But
if the last conversation is anything to go by.
if that is anything to go by. But this revolution is essentially about fighting corruption and state capture, but also building a solid state so that we can start rebuilding our economy. And I agree that corruption is a major factor, but it's important for us to just think about this process in phases. Because when we took over in 1994, we had a generation of activists. Some of us became ministers, some of us others became civil servants. And we're driven by this bigger goal, this idealist idea that we must go into the state and build a democratic state that will deliver to the people of our country. And I think that slowly corruption started coming in. And you then had a perception by some who felt that because they've been kept out of the state machinery, they did not have an opportunity to eat. So when there was a change in government around late 2000, 2007, 2008, there was a sense that there's a generation of people who had been outside of government who wanted to come in. And a lot of them were coming with a perception that says it's our chance to eat. So that's when the waters got a little more muddled and muddied to a very large extent, because you then started having people getting into government for the sole purpose of, providing some service delivery to communities, but primarily to actually build a nest for themselves and their friends and their
But how much is that still the case now? If you look at the reports, just the last 3 years, I mean, Zuma has been gone for 2 years now.
JJ, I think it's getting worse. I think it's
Themba,
because
please.
You then have many challenges. A lot of the state capture stuff that we talk about, for example, we're focusing on national government, national department. But all indications, the Auditor General report is also indicating that at local government level, we're starting to have people appointed as councillors and as mayors in some cases who are going in there simply to loot the coffers of the state. So delivery of services to our communities is taking a backseat to a very large extent. And I think that's a challenge that we're facing. And that's why I'm equating it to almost a revolution. The struggle that we engage in to defeat colonialism and apartheid is almost a similar struggle that we need to engage in to defeat corruption, to defeat state capture, so that we can build a solid state.
How are we going to defeat it, though? Because if you say to me it's getting worse, believe me, I mean, sometimes I wake up as a pessimist, but I would never expected that answer, that it's getting worse. I would have said maybe with a new dawn and so on, a new NPA, people will begin to have, eval. Because they say, eval must, some conscience must rise.
What is missing is basically the absence of consequences. That is, people have done wrong things. We've not seen anybody being taken to task, anybody being taken to prison. And when you start having situations where there are serious allegations being made against leaders, political leaders, from president to ministers, MECs, premiers, etc., that thing tends to become a malice of sorts, because it starts cascading down to the lower levels. Lower civil servants starting to think, if ministers or MECs or councillors can get away with something as serious as this, maybe it's also an opportunity for me to take some cash on the side using the state coffers to actually look after myself.
Because
so
it's almost
the first thing for me
Yeah.
is to make sure that we strengthen these law enforcement agencies, so that when somebody is found to have been guilty of theft, of corruption, because that's what corruption is about,
Yeah.
there are consequences. People see that you will get arrested,
Yeah.
you'll be prosecuted, you'll spend many, many years in jail,
Yeah.
and you'll lose some of your
But our
assets. I think
system
that
seems
will-
to have been emasculated them.
I think that's part of the problem.
Because, I mean, just look at the last year, right? If you had an agile criminal justice system, some of the people who have been testifying, they could have just been arrested as they leave the door, just be arrested to say, you admitted to doing this, let's go. But for some reason, there seems to be a hurry, slowly approach to law enforcement. Look at the same reports we've been talking about of the Auditor General over the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, my favorite one is when you guys were still in charge in 2009, right? The AG submitted a report to SCOPA that indicated that close to 2,000 civil servants were found to have been doing business with themselves. I mean, you can't be more brazen than that, right? You are a DG, you have a company in your name, and you give that company money, right? And then it's reported as an irregularity, and you still keep your job.
Look, I'm starting with consequences, because I think that's really important. When something has gone terribly wrong, you've got to make sure that people who are involved in corruption and state capture face the full might of the law. And part of the challenge that we're facing now is that law enforcement agencies were weakened over the past couple of years. So that's an important thing. The second thing that needs to happen, JJ, is that there needs to be very, very strong leadership. And I think that's what we're beginning to see, where somebody right at the top of government, in the form of our President Ramaphosa, beginning to send a very clear signal that corruption is intolerable, and that steps are being put in place to make sure that we deal with those who are implicated in corruption. So that's very instructive. I think that's very important. But the third thing that needs to be taken into account is reversing the brain drain that the public service has actually experienced.
We'll come to that, because you used to be in charge of public service. I'm very curious to understand how systems were put in place, right, to differentiate between public servants. There are public servants who work for SAA now, who are on 5, 4, 6, 7 million rand salary, right? And the place is burning, right, and crashing, literally. And then you've got a civil servant who has to supervise these people, who earns, $1 million rand or less, right? And who has to tell them what to do, and they are earning 7 million rand. He's earning as chief director responsible for stakeholder, right? And I want to understand after the break what that means. By the way, the pronouncement by the president, and I can tell you now without even fear of contradiction, I was relieved at Nazareth when it was Cyril who won. I'm not apologetic about that. But some of the pronouncements are hollow in the context of his political chains that he is in. He's got a Secretary General who has a book this thick with allegations of theft and what have you. He has not been questioned by a single police person. So sometimes people look at these things and say, this guy is saying corruption, this and this, but the people next to him are busy stealing, and they even pronounce it to say, he's only here for 5 years. And I want you to talk to me about whether you think that there is some introspection that the ruling party itself must do in order to transmit that into their deployees in government, and also for them to be taken seriously. Themba Maseko is GCIS, former GCIS CEO, as well as an activist and commentator, and as well as someone who has really done his bit in the public service in a long while, and is sharing with me his views about where this country is going. Stay tuned for more conversation after the break.